You told me I don't belong here, but this hotel is mine.
And today, the only one who should leave is you.
Get out. You're too poor to be in this establishment. The words echoed through the marble-columned lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel like thunder, causing every head in the opulent space to turn toward the source of the commotion. Victoria Ashworth, tech billionaire and founder of Ashworth Industries, stood in her designer Chanel suit, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly at a young woman in worn jeans and a simple sweater who had just walked through the hotel's crystal doors. The young woman, Elena Vasquez, paused mid-step, her hand still gripping the handle of her battered canvas messenger bag. At 26, she had learned to navigate the world carefully, conscious that her appearance often spoke louder than her words in spaces like this. But what Victoria Ashworth couldn't see beneath Elena's modest clothing was a Harvard MBA, a Stanford computer science degree, and most importantly, the legal documents in her bag that proved she was the new owner of the very hotel where this humiliation was taking place. "Excuse me," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the 100 pairs of eyes now fixed on her. The Grand Meridian's lobby, with its soaring ceilings and million-dollar chandeliers, had fallen completely silent except for the gentle tinkling of the fountain at its center. Victoria's face contorted with disgust as she looked Elena up and down, taking in the second-hand clothes, the scuffed shoes, the absence of designer accessories that marked someone as worthy of occupying the same space as people like her. "You heard me perfectly well. This is a 5-star establishment, not a homeless shelter. Whatever charity case brought you here, you need to leave immediately before you make the other guests uncomfortable." Elena felt the familiar sting of judgment based on appearance, but what hurt more was the casual cruelty in Victoria's voice, the automatic assumption that someone dressed modestly had no right to exist in a beautiful space. Around them, other guests whispered and pointed, some pulling out phones to record what they assumed would be an entertaining spectacle of someone being put in their place. James Morrison, the hotel's general manager, hurried across the lobby, his face flushed with embarrassment and panic. He had worked at the Grand Meridian for 15 years and had never seen such a public confrontation in the establishment's dignified space. "Ms. Ashworth, perhaps we could handle this more discreetly." "Don't you dare tell me how to handle anything, James," Victoria snapped, her voice rising even higher. "I pay more for my penthouse suite here than most people make in a year. I will not tolerate having to share these premises with people who clearly don't belong. Look at her. She probably can't afford a cup of coffee in our restaurant, let alone a room in this hotel." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself the way her grandmother had taught her during the difficult years when they'd struggled to make ends meet. When she opened them, her gaze was calm but resolute. "Mom, I understand you're concerned about the hotel's reputation, but I assure you I have every right to be here." "Every right?" Victoria laughed, a harsh sound that made several nearby guests wince. "What right could someone like you possibly have? Did you win some pathetic contest? Are you here on charity? Or did you just wander in off the street, thinking you could pretend to belong somewhere like this?" James shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The Grand Meridian prided itself on discretion and elegant service, and this public humiliation was everything the hotel stood against. "Ms. Ashworth, I really think we should lower our voices and discuss this privately." "I will not lower my voice," Victoria declared, her sense of superiority now fully engaged. "I want everyone in this lobby to understand that standards matter. When you allow just anyone to walk through these doors, you devalue the entire experience for people who actually deserve to be here. This girl is clearly lost and needs to find somewhere more appropriate for her economic circumstances." Elena reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a manila folder, her movements careful and deliberate. "I'm actually here for a scheduled meeting with the hotel management. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a more private setting." A meeting, Victoria scoffed. Let me guess. You're here to apply for a housekeeping position. Well, I hate to break it to you, sweetheart, but even the staff here maintains higher standards than whatever thrift store explosion you're wearing. The cruelty of the comment sent a murmur of shock through the assembled crowd. Even the other wealthy guests seemed taken aback by Victoria's viciousness, but Elena remained composed, though her grip on the folder tightened slightly. Ms. Ashworth, James said desperately, please, this is neither the time nor the place for this kind of discussion. Our other guests are trying to enjoy their afternoon. Our other guests deserve protection from this kind of intrusion, Victoria retorted. When I pay $30,000 a month for my penthouse suite, I expect a certain caliber of clientele in the common areas. I should not have to encounter people who clearly wandered in from the bus station. Eleanor felt anger flare in her chest, but also something else, recognition. She had seen this same dynamic play out countless times during her journey from poverty to success. The automatic assumption that economic struggle meant moral failing, that designer clothes indicated superior character, that wealth was synonymous with worth. Ma'am, Eleanor said, her voice still calm but now carrying an undertone of steel, I think you're making some assumptions about me that aren't accurate. The only assumption I'm making, Victoria replied coldly, is that you're in the wrong place. This hotel caters to successful people, entrepreneurs, business leaders, people who've actually accomplished something meaningful with their lives. You're clearly none of those things. What Victoria didn't know was that Elena Vasquez had spent the last 8 years building a revolutionary fintech company from her grandmother's garage, that she had just sold her startup to Goldman Sachs for $2.8 billion, making her one of the youngest female billionaires in tech history. More importantly, Victoria had no idea that Elena had used part of that windfall to quietly purchase the Grand Meridian Hotel through a shell company, intending to transform it into a model of inclusive luxury hospitality. You know what I think, Victoria continued, warming to her theme as she noticed the crowd of onlookers growing larger. I think you're some kind of influencer or blogger trying to create content by pretending you belong in places like this. It's pathetic, really. Instead of working to actually improve your circumstances, you're playing dress-up in spaces where real success gathers. Eleanor opened the manila folder and glanced at the documents inside. Purchase agreement, transfer of ownership, board resolutions, everything that proved this entire hotel. From the marble floors Victoria stood on to the penthouse suite she bragged about, now belonged to the young woman she was trying to humiliate. I'm actually here, Elena said quietly, to meet with the hotel's management about some significant changes that will be taking effect immediately. Changes? Victoria laughed again. Honey, the only change happening here is you walking back out those doors and finding somewhere more suited to your budget. Might I suggest the youth hostel down the street? James Morrison was now visibly sweating, caught between his instinct to protect a guest's feelings and his need to maintain order in the hotel. He had no idea who Elena was, but her calm demeanor in the face of such vicious treatment suggested she was someone who commanded respect in other contexts. Miss Ashworth, he tried again, perhaps we could all step into my office and discuss this matter privately. There's nothing to discuss, Victoria snapped. Security should have stopped this girl at the door. What are we paying them for if anyone can just waltz in here and contaminate the atmosphere? Eleanor looked around the lobby, taking in the faces of the other guests, the hotel staff, the ornate decorations that would soon be under her stewardship. She had imagined this moment differently, had hoped to make the ownership transition smoothly and quietly, but Victoria Ashworth had forced a public confrontation that would require a public response. Ma'am, Elena said, raising her voice just enough to be heard clearly throughout the lobby, I need to inform you of something important. As of this morning, I am the new owner of the Grand Meridian Hotel. The lobby fell into complete silence. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. James Morrison's eyes went wide with shock and sudden understanding. The crowd of onlookers leaned forward, sensing that the dynamic of the confrontation had just shifted dramatically. "That's impossible," Victoria whispered, her voice suddenly much smaller than it had been moments before. Elena reached into her folder and pulled out the official ownership documents, the Goldman Sachs acquisition papers, and her identification. Elena Vasquez, CEO and founder of Vasquez Financial Technologies, which was acquired by Goldman Sachs last month for $2.8 billion. I used a portion of those proceeds to purchase this hotel through VFT Holdings. She handed the documents to James Morrison, whose hands shook as he examined them. His face went from confusion to recognition to horror as he realized what had just happened. The young woman Victoria had been publicly humiliating wasn't just wealthy, she was his new boss. "These appear to be in order," James said weakly, his voice barely audible in the stunned silence of the lobby. Victoria snatched the papers from his hands, scanning them desperately for some sign that this was an elaborate hoax. But the legal language was unmistakable, the signatures authentic, the letterheads genuine. Elena Vasquez really was the new owner of the Grand Meridian Hotel. This can't be real," Victoria stammered, her face now pale with shock and dawning humiliation. You're nobody. You dress like a college student. You look like you shop at discount stores." "I do shop at discount stores," Elena replied calmly. "I also donate most of my money to educational foundations and poverty alleviation programs. I've found that expensive clothes don't make someone a better person, but apparently they do make others treat you better, which says more about society than it does about fashion." The crowd was now murmuring excitedly, phones capturing every moment of what had become an epic reversal of fortune. Victoria Ashworth, known throughout the tech world for her arrogance and her habit of publicly humiliating employees and competitors, had just been caught in the most spectacular misjudgment of her career. But you can't own this hotel," Victoria protested weakly. "I have a contract for my penthouse suite. I have rights here. I'm a valued customer." "You were a valued customer," Elena corrected gently. But as of right now, your behavior toward hotel guests and staff makes you inconsistent with the values this establishment will embody going forward." James Morrison cleared his throat nervously. "Ms. Vasquez, I had no idea. If I had known you were coming, I would have prepared a proper welcome. I sincerely apologize for this unfortunate incident." "The incident isn't your fault, Mr. Morrison," Elena replied. But it does illustrate exactly why I purchased this hotel. Too many spaces like this operate on the assumption that a person's worth can be determined by their appearance or their spending power. I intend to change that." Victoria was now looking around the lobby desperately, seeking support from the other guests who had been enjoying the spectacle when she was the one doing the humiliating. But the crowd had shifted, no longer seeing her as an amusing enforcer of social hierarchy, but as someone who had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Mrs. Vasquez," Victoria said, her voice now pleading rather than commanding, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was protecting the hotel's reputation. Surely you can understand the importance of maintaining standards." "I absolutely understand the importance of standards," Elena replied. "That's why I've decided that guests who publicly humiliate others based on their appearance will no longer be welcome at the Grand Meridian." The implications of Elena's words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She was being banned from the hotel where she maintained $1 million annual suite, where she conducted business meetings, where she had built relationships with other wealthy and powerful people. The social and professional implications would be devastating. "You can't ban me," Victoria said desperately. "I have contracts, agreements, business relationships tied to this location. You can't just destroy someone's life because of one small misunderstanding." "I'm not destroying anything," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm simply ensuring that the Grand Meridian becomes a place where all guests are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how much money they appear to have or what clothes they wear. But I was just..." Victoria struggled to find words that would somehow undo the damage she had caused. "You were just demonstrating exactly the kind of prejudice and casual cruelty that has no place in a truly luxury establishment," Elena finished. "Real luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about making everyone feel valued and welcome." James Morrison was frantically calculating the implications of this confrontation. Victoria Ashworth was indeed a major customer, but Elena Vasquez was now the owner of the entire property. The choice between them was obvious, even if it meant losing significant revenue from Victoria's extended stays. "Ms. Ashworth," he said reluctantly, "I think it would be best if you gathered your belongings from the penthouse suite. We'll arrange for your departure this afternoon." "This is insane," Victoria protested, her voice rising again, but now with panic rather than arrogance. "You're choosing some random girl over a customer who's been loyal to this hotel for 5 years. I'm choosing human decency over revenue," James replied, finding his backbone for the first time in the conversation. "Something I should have done the moment you started this public humiliation." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Ms. Ashworth, I want you to understand something. I don't take pleasure in this reversal. I would have preferred to handle the ownership transition quietly and professionally, but your behavior forced a public response. If stories of hidden potential and human dignity inspire you, subscribe to join our community that values authentic character over superficial success," Elena continued, speaking not just to Victoria, but to the crowd that had gathered to witness the confrontation. "What happened here today illustrates how dangerous it is to judge people based on assumptions rather than taking the time to learn who they really are." Victoria was now crying, her perfect makeup streaking down her face as the full weight of her humiliation settled over her. "Please," she whispered, "you don't understand what this will do to my reputation, my business relationships. I can't be banned from places like this." "Then perhaps," Elena said with quiet dignity, "you should consider why those relationships are so fragile that they depend on where you're allowed to stay, rather than who you are as a person." The crowd began to disperse, some people approaching Elena to introduce themselves and apologize for not speaking up during Victoria's tirade, others hurrying away to avoid being associated with the fallout. The lobby slowly returned to its normal, elegant hum, but the tension remained thick in the air. "Ms. Vasquez," James said carefully, "what would you like me to do about Ms. Ashworth's belongings in the penthouse?" "Have them packed carefully and delivered to whatever address she provides," Elena replied, "and provide her with a full refund for any prepaid accommodation. Despite her behavior, she deserves to be treated with dignity." Victoria looked up sharply, surprised by this unexpected grace. You're giving me my money back? Even after you demonstrated the worst of human nature?" "Yes," Elena confirmed, "because responding to cruelty with cruelty doesn't break the cycle, it perpetuates it." I don't understand," Victoria said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Why would you show kindness to someone who treated you so badly?" "Because," Elena said simply, "everyone deserves the chance to learn and grow from their mistakes. The question is whether you'll use this experience to examine your prejudices or just find new ways to rationalize them. Have you ever witnessed someone's prejudice shattered by unexpected excellence? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire others to look beyond appearances," Elena said, addressing the small crowd that remained in the lobby. "What happened here today happens in smaller ways every single day, in offices and restaurants and stores around the world. People making assumptions about worth based on clothing, accent, age, or appearance." Victoria was now sitting in one of the lobby's plush chairs, staring at Elena with a mixture of shame and confusion. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly. How do you stay so calm when someone treats you the way I just treated you? Elena sat down in the chair across from Victoria, ignoring the surprised looks from hotel staff who expected her to maintain her authority through distance. And I learned early in life that other people's prejudice says nothing about my worth and everything about their limitations. Getting angry or defensive just gives their ignorance power over my peace of mind. But I was so cruel to you, Victoria said, her voice breaking. I said terrible things, made awful assumptions. I tried to humiliate you in front of all these people. Yes, you did, Elena agreed matter-of-factly. But humiliation only works if the person being humiliated accepts the premises underlying the attack. I never accepted that my clothes determined my worth, so your comments about my appearance couldn't actually hurt me. Victoria stared at her, struggling to understand this perspective. In her world, image was everything, perception was reality, and public humiliation was a devastating weapon. The idea that someone could be immune to such attacks by simply rejecting their fundamental assumptions was foreign to her. I don't know how to be like that, Victoria admitted. I've spent my whole life believing that what people think of me, how I look, what I own, where I'm seen, that all of that matters more than anything else. It doesn't, Elena said gently, but believing that it does makes you vulnerable to exactly the kind of cruelty you just displayed. When you're terrified of being judged, you become incredibly judgmental of others. James Morrison approached their conversation hesitantly. Ms. Vasquez, I hate to interrupt, but we should discuss the transition timeline and your vision for the hotel's future operations. Of course, Elena replied, standing up. But first, I want to make something clear to all staff. The Grand Meridian will no longer tolerate discrimination against guests or employees based on appearance, economic status, accent, or any other superficial characteristics. Our luxury should be defined by how we make people feel, not by how much money they spend. Understood completely, James said, relief evident in his voice. And I think the entire staff will appreciate that direction. Elena turned back to Victoria, who was still sitting in the chair looking lost and confused. Ms. Ashworth, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll think about it seriously. What do you think would have happened today if I hadn't been able to produce those ownership documents? If I really had been just a young woman in modest clothes who happened to walk into this lobby? Victoria considered the question, and the answer made her feel sick. You would have been thrown out, humiliated, possibly arrested if you had tried to insist on your right to be here. Exactly, Elena confirmed, and that person would have deserved just as much dignity and respect as I do now, that you know I'm wealthy. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of my net worth, not my inherent value as a human being. The truth of it hit Victoria with devastating clarity. She had been prepared to dehumanize someone completely based on clothing and assumptions, and only the revelation of wealth had restored Elena's humanity in her eyes. The implications of that realization were staggering. I've been doing this my whole life, haven't I? Victoria whispered. Of making assumptions about people, treating them differently based on how much money I think they have. Probably, Elena said honestly, but recognizing it is the first step toward changing it. How do I change something so deeply ingrained? Victoria asked. How do I stop seeing people as categories instead of individuals? Elena considered the question carefully. You start by questioning every assumption you make about someone before you've bothered to learn their story. You expose yourself to people and experiences outside your economic bubble, and you accept that being uncomfortable with your prejudices is necessary for growth. I don't know if I'm brave enough to do that, Victoria admitted. Then you'll keep living in a world where your worth depends on other people's opinions and your security depends on keeping others beneath you, Elena replied. That's not actually security at all. It's prison. James Morrison cleared his throat again. Ms. Vasquez, the transition meeting. Right, Elena said. then looked back at Victoria. "Miss Ashworth, you're welcome to stay for lunch if you'd like to continue this conversation. As my guest, regardless of your earlier behavior," Victoria looked up in shock. You're inviting me to lunch after everything I said to you? "I'm offering you the dignity you tried to deny me," Elena replied. "You did not because you deserve it based on your behavior, but because every person deserves it based on their humanity." 3 hours later, Victoria Ashworth sat across from Elena Vasquez in the Grand Meridian's dining room, her worldview systematically dismantled and rebuilt over the course of their conversation. Elena had shared her story, growing up in poverty with her grandmother after her parents died, working multiple jobs to pay for community college, earning scholarships that eventually led to Stanford and Harvard, building her company with $1,000 investments from friends and family who believed in her vision. "You know what's funny?" Victoria said, picking at her salad without really eating. "I've spent so much energy maintaining my image, proving my worth through possessions and status, but you've accomplished more meaningful change in the world than I have, and you do it while shopping at thrift stores. Accomplishment isn't measured by the size of your impact on quarterly earnings," Elena replied. "It's measured by the size of your impact on human lives. Your technology has probably helped thousands of businesses become more efficient. That matters too. But I've also hurt people," Victoria said quietly. "Employees I've humiliated, competitors I've destroyed, service workers I've treated as invisible. I've used my success as a weapon instead of a tool for building something better. If this story reminded you that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, share it with someone who needs this message today," Elena said gently. "But more importantly, share it through your actions. Show people that successful individuals can choose humility over arrogance, compassion over cruelty." Victoria nodded slowly. "I want to make amends somehow. To you, to the people I've hurt over the years. But I don't know how to begin." "You begin with the next person you encounter who doesn't look like they belong in your space," Elena suggested. "You choose curiosity over judgment, respect over dismissal. You ask yourself what you can learn from them instead of how you can categorize them. And if I slip back into old patterns, then you apologize, learn from the mistake, and try again," Elena said simply. "Growth isn't a destination, it's a daily choice." 6 months later, the Grand Meridian Hotel had become something unprecedented in the luxury hospitality industry. A 5-star establishment that maintained its elegance and service standards while actively welcoming guests from all economic backgrounds. Elena had implemented a revolutionary sliding scale pricing system, scholarships for service industry training, and partnerships with local community organizations. Victoria Ashworth had become one of the hotel's most passionate advocates for inclusive luxury, using her influence in tech circles to promote Elena's vision and challenge other business leaders to examine their own assumptions about worth and wealth. The public humiliation that had nearly destroyed her reputation had instead become the catalyst for genuine transformation. "You know," Victoria said during one of their monthly dinners at the hotel, "I used to think that story in the lobby was the worst moment of my life. Now, I think it might have been the best." "Why's that?" Elena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because it forced me to confront who I really was," Victoria replied, "and it showed me who I could become. I spent 50 years believing that my worth came from being better than other people. You taught me that real worth comes from lifting other people up." Elena smiled. "And you've been doing exactly that. The mentorship program you started for young entrepreneurs, the scholarships you've funded, the way you've used your platform to challenge prejudice in tech spaces, it's all made a real difference." "I'm still learning," Victoria said. "Still catching myself making assumptions, still having to consciously choose humility over arrogance. But the difference is that now I recognize those moments and course correct." "That's all any of us can do," Eleanor replied. recognize our blind spots, and work to see more clearly. As they finished their meal, both women reflected on the journey that had brought them to this friendship. A journey that began with cruel assumptions and public humiliation, but had led to mutual growth, meaningful partnership, and a profound understanding of what it meant to treat all people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. The young woman who had walked into the Grand Meridian in modest clothes had not only revealed herself as the hotel's owner, but had used that power to create a model of inclusive excellence that was being replicated in luxury establishments around the world. And the billionaire who had tried to humiliate her based on appearances had learned that true luxury wasn't about exclusion, but about making everyone feel valued and welcome. In learning to see beyond Elena's thrift store clothes to her extraordinary character and achievements, Victoria had finally learned to see beyond her own expensive facade to the person she wanted to become. And in that mutual recognition of worth and potential, both women had discovered that the most luxurious experience of all was genuine human connection based on respect, understanding, and shared commitment to lifting each other up. The hotel lobby where their confrontation had taken place now served as a daily reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions could be dangerous, and that real elegance came not from what you wore or owned, but from how you treated the people around you. And every guest who entered those crystal doors was welcomed not based on their ability to pay, but on their fundamental humanity, creating a truly revolutionary definition of luxury hospitality. The transformation of the Grand Meridian became a case study taught in business schools around the world. Elena's innovative approach to inclusive luxury had not only maintained the hotel's 5-star rating, but had actually improved it, as guests from all backgrounds praised the exceptional service and genuine warmth they experienced. Victoria's journey of self-discovery had taken her far beyond simple apologies and donations. She had enrolled in courses on unconscious bias, volunteered at community centers in underserved neighborhoods, and most importantly, had begun to see her wealth as a responsibility rather than just a privilege. "You know what I realized yesterday?" Victoria said during one of their regular coffee meetings in the hotel's renovated community space, which now served both paying guests and scholarship recipients from local colleges. "I spent 48 years of my life thinking that having money made me superior to people who didn't have money. But money is just a tool. It's what you do with it that determines your worth." Eleanor smiled as she watched a group of young entrepreneurs from the hotel's startup incubator program presenting their ideas to a panel of investors. Half of them were scholarship recipients from the community programs she had established. Brilliant minds who might never have had these opportunities under the old system. "What's your biggest fear now?" Elena asked, genuinely curious about Victoria's ongoing transformation. Victoria considered the question carefully. "That I'll backslide, that in a moment of stress or pressure, I'll revert to my old patterns of judging people based on appearances or treating service workers as invisible. The neural pathways of prejudice run deep, and I have to consciously choose better thoughts and actions every single day." The fact that you're aware of that possibility means you're less likely to let it happen, Elena observed. "Unconscious bias is most dangerous when it's truly unconscious." They were interrupted by James Morrison, who approached their table with obvious excitement. "Ms. Vasquez, I wanted to share some incredible news. The inclusive luxury initiative you started here is being adopted by hotel chains across 6 continents. The Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, and Mandarin Oriental have all reached out requesting consultation on implementing similar programs." Elena felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with profit margins or recognition. "That's wonderful, James. How many hotels does that represent?" "Over 300 properties worldwide," James replied. "Oh, and they're all interested in the sliding scale pricing model, the community partnership programs, and most importantly, the staff training on dignity-based service regardless of guest spending power. Victoria shook her head in amazement. In less than 2 years, you've revolutionized an entire industry. And it all started because I was stupid enough to judge you based on your clothes. It started because you gave me the opportunity to demonstrate that worth isn't determined by appearance, Elena corrected gently. If you had simply ignored me that day, none of this transformation would have happened. So you're saying my prejudice accidentally created something positive? Victoria asked with a wry smile. I'm saying that even negative experiences can become catalysts for growth if we choose to learn from them rather than repeat them, Elena replied. Your cruelty that day forced a conversation that needed to happen, not just between us, but in society more broadly. 6 months later, Victoria Ashworth stood before a packed auditorium at the annual Tech Leadership Conference, preparing to deliver a keynote speech that would have been unimaginable just 3 years earlier. The topic, Beyond the Algorithm, How Unconscious Bias Limits Innovation and Human Potential. 3 years ago, Victoria began, her voice steady but vulnerable. I publicly humiliated a young woman in a hotel lobby because I assumed her modest clothing meant she didn't belong in a luxury space. I was wrong in every possible way. That woman was not only more successful than I was, she was more generous, more innovative, and infinitely more wise about what actually matters in life. The audience listened in rapt attention as Victoria continued. But this isn't a story about how I learned that some people in modest clothes are actually successful. This is a story about how I learned that a person's worth has nothing to do with their wealth, their clothes, or their ability to afford luxury experiences. This is about learning to see the inherent dignity in every human being. She clicked to the next slide, showing before and after photos of the Grand Meridian's community programs. The woman I tried to humiliate that day was Elena Vasquez. And she didn't just forgive my ignorance, she used it as an opportunity to create something transformative. The Grand Meridian Hotel is now a model for inclusive luxury that proves you can maintain excellence while serving people from all economic backgrounds. A hand raised in the audience. Ms. Ashworth, how do you respond to critics who say that businesses have no obligation to address social inequality? Victoria smiled, remembering how she would have answered that question 3 years ago. I would say those critics are missing the biggest business opportunity of our generation. When you exclude people based on assumptions about their worth or potential, you're excluding brilliant minds, innovative ideas, and untapped markets. Prejudice isn't just morally wrong, it's economically stupid. Another audience member spoke up. And what practical steps can tech leaders take to address bias in their organizations? Start by examining your own assumptions, Victoria replied. I guarantee you're making judgments about people's intelligence, work ethic, and potential based on factors that have nothing to do with their actual capabilities. Age, accent, education background, appearance, economic status. We use all of these as shortcuts instead of actually getting to know people. She advanced to the next slide, showing statistics from companies that had implemented bias training and inclusive hiring practices. But more than that, create systems that force you to evaluate people based on merit rather than comfort. If your leadership team, your hiring managers, your board of directors all look and think exactly like you, you're missing perspectives that could transform your business. The presentation continued for another hour, with Victoria sharing specific strategies, real-world examples, and honest reflections on her own ongoing journey. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Later that evening, Elena called to congratulate her on the presentation, which had been live-streamed to over 50,000 viewers. I watched the whole thing, Elena said. You were incredible, honest, vulnerable, practical. Everything that kind of message needs to be. I was terrified, Victoria admitted. Standing up there and talking about my own prejudice, my own failures. It felt like professional suicide. How do you feel now? Elena asked. Liberated, Victoria said without hesitation. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was saying something that actually mattered, something that could help people grow instead of just helping them make money. And the response? Overwhelming, Victoria replied. I've gotten over 200 messages from other executives asking for advice on implementing similar changes in their organizations. Apparently, a lot of people have been waiting for permission to talk about these issues openly. Elena wasn't surprised. Most people know that prejudice is wrong, but they don't know how to address it without seeming weak or admitting fault. You gave them a roadmap for honest self-examination and positive change. 3 months later, Victoria and Elena stood together in the lobby of the Grand Meridian, watching as a group of young people from the hotel's scholarship program presented their final projects to a panel of investors and mentors. The lobby, that had once been the site of cruel humiliation, had been transformed into a space of opportunity and recognition. Look at them, Elena said, nodding toward a brilliant 18-year-old named Marcus, who was explaining his app for connecting homeless individuals with social services. 6 months ago, he was sleeping in his car. Today, he's pitching to venture capitalists who are fighting over the chance to fund his startup. Victoria watched Marcus field questions with confidence and grace, his background of struggle informing his passion for solving real problems. I would have walked right past him 6 months ago, she said quietly. I would have seen a homeless teenager and assumed he had nothing valuable to contribute. And now, Elena prompted, now I see someone whose perspective on resource scarcity and systemic barriers gives him insights that people like me could never develop on our own, Victoria replied. And his disadvantages have become advantages because they've forced him to understand problems from the inside out. They were approached by Dr. Sarah Chen, a Harvard Business School professor, who had been documenting the Grand Meridian's transformation as part of a longitudinal study on inclusive business practices. Ms. Vasquez, Ms. Ashworth, I wanted to share some preliminary findings from our research. What have you discovered? Eleanor asked. And the inclusion programs you've implemented haven't just improved staff satisfaction and guest experience scores, Dr. Chen explained. They've actually increased profitability by 18% over the past year. Turns out that when you serve a broader market and tap into previously excluded talent pools, you generate more revenue and innovation than traditional luxury models. Victoria laughed. And so Elena was right about prejudice being economically stupid, not just morally wrong. Exactly, Dr. Chen confirmed. But more than that, you've created a sustainable model that other businesses can replicate. The initial investment in inclusive infrastructure pays for itself within the first year, and the long-term benefits compound over time. As Dr. Chen walked away to continue her research, Elena turned to Victoria with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I really had been just a young woman in thrift store clothes with no money or credentials? Every day, Victoria replied immediately. And the answer makes me sick. I would have destroyed someone's dignity for no reason other than my own insecurity and prejudice. That person would have deserved the same respect I'm showing you now, but they wouldn't have gotten it. That's the real test, isn't it? Elena mused. How we treat people who have nothing to offer us, no power to affect our lives, no ability to enhance our status or success. I'm still working on that, Victoria admitted, but I'm getting better. Last week, I spent 2 hours talking with a homeless veteran outside my office building. Not because I wanted to help him or because I thought he might have a hidden talent, but just because he was a human being who deserved to be seen and heard. What did you learn from him? Elena asked. That he had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, that he spoke 4 languages, that he had a degree in mechanical engineering, and that a combination of PTSD and medical bankruptcy had led to his homelessness. Victoria replied, But more than that, I learned that he had maintained his dignity and kindness despite circumstances that would have broken most people. Did you help him? I connected him with some resources, but honestly, he helped me more than I helped him, Victoria said. He reminded me that resilience and character aren't distributed based on economic status. Some of the strongest, wisest people I've met have been those who've lost everything and found ways to keep going. As the evening progressed, Elena and Victoria found themselves in the hotel's rooftop garden, looking out over the city lights and reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment of friendship and partnership. You know what's funny, Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. I spent most of my life trying to prove I was better than other people, and it made me miserable. Now I spend my time trying to learn from other people, and I've never been happier. Superiority is a prison, Elena agreed. When you think you're better than others, you cut yourself off from their wisdom, their experiences, their perspectives. You become smaller, not larger. I was so small back then, Victoria reflected. My world was tiny, just a bubble of people who looked and thought exactly like me. I thought that bubble was the whole universe. And now, your world includes Marcus, sleeping in his car, Dr. Okafor, cleaning offices with her engineering degrees, Carlos supporting his family on a security guard's salary, and thousands of other people whose stories you never would have bothered to learn. My world is enormous now, Victoria said with wonder. And yet every person I meet teaches me something I didn't know about resilience, creativity, problem solving, or just what it means to be human. Elena smiled. That's the real luxury, isn't it? Access to the full spectrum of human experience and wisdom. They sat in comfortable silence for several more minutes, watching the city pulse with life below them. Finally, Victoria spoke again. Elena, I need to ask you something I've never asked before. Do you forgive me? Not just for that day in the lobby, but for all the years I spent being the kind of person who would humiliate someone based on their appearance. Elena considered the question carefully. I forgave you a long time ago, Victoria. But more importantly, you've forgiven yourself by becoming someone different. Forgiveness isn't just about letting go of the past. It's about choosing to be better in the future. I'm still choosing to be better every day, Victoria said. Some days are easier than others. That's all any of us can do, Elena replied. Choose to be better today than we were yesterday. Choose to see more clearly. Choose to treat people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Thank you, Victoria said simply, for seeing potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself, for believing I could change when I didn't even want to change, and for showing me what it means to use privilege responsibly. Thank you, Elena replied, for proving that people really can grow, that prejudice really can be overcome, and that even the worst moments can become catalysts for transformation. As they prepared to leave the garden, both women understood that their friendship had become something more than personal connection. It had become a living example of what was possible when people chose growth over defensiveness, curiosity over judgment, and love over fear. The hotel lobby where their confrontation had taken place continued to serve thousands of guests from all backgrounds, each one treated with the dignity that Elena had insisted was every person's birthright. And in meeting rooms and conference halls around the world, other business leaders were implementing similar changes, inspired by the proof that inclusion and excellence were not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing. The story that began with, "Get out, you're too poor," had become a story about welcoming everyone in, about recognizing worth that transcended wealth, and about the transformation that became possible when people were brave enough to confront their own prejudices and committed enough to do the daily work of becoming better. In hotels and offices, in classrooms and boardrooms, in casual encounters between strangers, The ripple effects of that confrontation continued to spread, reminding everyone who heard the story that first impressions could be devastatingly wrong, that assumptions could be dangerous, and that every person deserved to be seen, heard, and valued for their inherent humanity rather than their external circumstances. And in the friendship between Elena Vasquez and Victoria Ashworth, the world had gained a powerful example of redemption, growth, and the beautiful possibilities that emerged when people chose connection over separation, understanding over judgment, and love over fear. Their story proved that it was never too late to change, never too difficult to grow, and never impossible to become the kind of person who made the world more welcoming for everyone.